Maybe it was better.
Exactly. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. My guest today really needs no introduction. He is a Broadway playwright whose plays verge on absurdity and dark humor and tackles subject matters some might find taboo. His titles include The Maiden's Prayer, Pterodactyls, Fat Men in Skirts, The Altruists, Raised in Captivity, Too Much Sun, and The Lyons. The latter two starring Linda Lavin and The Lyons landing him on Broadway. He currently resides in London, where his stage reading of his current play, The Einstein Letters, was quite well received. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my complete honor to welcome Nicky Silver.
I like that I'm cut off.
But you scoot on over.
Is aging much more slowly than the right side of my face, so I'm happy with this.
As you slowly creep off even more. Oh, come on. You look beautiful.
Let's not dwell.
This is such a special occasion for me that I dressed up. I don't wear a suit for this thing.
I normally wear a suit. I wear a suit and tie. Like, no one has ever seen me without a blazer or a sport coat. They only call them blazers here. The sport coat, the word doesn't really exist. But it's for me, even though it's 10:30, because I have to do my pedals, meaning I have to work out. I had to get up very early, so I don't have a blazer on today.
Did you do your pedals already?
I did. Good.
It's 2:30 in the morning here, so I will not be doing pedals.
You look fresh as a daisy.
I try to. So let's talk about this latest endeavor. What is the Einstein Letters?
I love this play, and I don't like all of my plays.
I want to talk about that as well.
Sometimes when they're happening, I go, "Oh God, how did they let this get by?" But I moved to London, and I wrote two plays, and called The Einstein Letter and London Spring. The Einstein Letter is probably a better play, and more universal. London Spring, believe it or not, is about a sort of homosexual, agoraphobic playwright who later, in his 50s, moves to London. I think these things. But there's a murder in it, and it sort of turns into an Orton play before your very eyes. Why create when you can simply purloin? So I also wrote London, the Einstein Letter, which I think is a better play probably, and I won't say that when London Spring is the toast of the town. But anyway, so I wrote it, and I spent about a year writing them, and then or a year and a half maybe. I didn't write every day. We'll talk about the process later, but then COVID hit, and there's no theater, of course, so nothing happened with anything. So they're just revving up again. I mean, theaters are open here, but there's a backlog of plays to produce and that sort of thing. So I know this guy, who has this little theater company, and he's great. And he does these staged readings. So I went to one of them. And I said, "Do you only do?" It was of Entertaining Mr. Sloan as It Happened, which is a play that I quite like because I love Joe Orton. And but they really do them like as if they were plays, except actors have script in their hands, and that isn't what I wanted to do. So I said, "Do you only do these old plays, these pieces of junk that you find at the used bookshop, or do you ever do new plays?" And he said, "Well, because he's American, or as we like to call them here, Americans."
Merkins are totally different.
I know. A merkin is a pubic toupee. I'm wearing mine now. I got it at the Zsa Zsa Gabor store. Well, she's a manufacturer of wigs and hairpieces of all ilk. So he agreed. So we did it, and we were very lucky. We had 6 phenomenal actors, and we didn't do it like it was actors had scripts in their hands, but they were in stools across the back, and except for one who was in the whole time downstage in a chair, they would just sort of get up and do the scene and then go back to the stools. But that may be the way the play happens, because it's not linear in real time or anything, the way Loot is or the way the Lyons is. And it was well lit, which elevated it. It made you feel like you were watching a play, like there were specials and sound effects and that sort of thing. And we only had one day of rehearsal, but we were so lucky that all 6 of them were great. But I do have to say, in particular, an actress named Sarah Kesselman, was Lydia, who is really the lead. And the character is of indiscriminate age, but I think she's described as a relic in the opening stage direction, with tattered white hair and in a soiled dressing gown, who was once very grand and now has fallen on hard times. None of this tells you why it's called the Einstein Letter, nor am I going to. There is a reason. It does come out. Okay. But anyway, so the reading went spectacularly well. There is some interest. I've spoken to a producer or two, and hopefully it'll happen. But if it doesn't happen, in many ways, the reading was the fulfillment of the creative process. Hearing it and seeing the audience response was very rewarding. I have very little ambition left. My ambition is to survive the day.
Well, sure, but you've got to have some ambition. You've got two new plays that are coming out.
No, those were really written because if I want to, and I do not know if I want to, but if I want the decision to be mine to stay in London for 20 years, 10 years, whatever, I have to produce, because I'm here as a playwright, as opposed to a refugee. Because they don't really like refugees too much here anymore. Same as in the US. So I have to produce. So I felt that pressure to create something. I'd be very happy to watch movies and go shopping, and I would say eat, but my eating habits are so demented, and I actually eat I used to be, if you look at the pictures on the internet, very, very fat. Now, although my face, I still look quite porcine.
It's all the pedals.
I'm still like a 29-inch waist. I lost a lot of weight when I was about 7 years ago, I guess, and have kept it off because I eat zero carbohydrates, no fruit, no vegetables, no grain, no sugar. I haven't had a fruit or a vegetable in 7 years, which may be why I have no ambition.
Are you on the carnivore diet? Is that what you're doing?
Well, I sort of made it up because somebody said to me, cut back on your carbs, but I can't cut back on things. I can only do zero. So really, I haven't had a fruit or a vegetable in 7 years, or sugar or grain. Which I suspect is why I have no ambition, because it has just drained me of the life force. But I'm thin. I mean, I'm a 38 in a suit, and it's really all that matters in this world we live in these days.
Ain't it the truth? Yeah. So can we? I know you don't want to talk about why it's called the Einstein Letter, which I said letters. I apologize. I didn't realize it was a singular. Can you tell us what it's about, or is that? What's that?
You to read. I wouldn't have objected. The Einstein Letter is about the relationship between this very, very old woman and this sort of surly young man who delivers her Meals on Wheels, which we don't call it Meals on Wheels, but that's what it is. He's been assigned this as a punishment. What's the word I'm looking for? When you have to do community service. And they are not friends. They're never friends. They don't become friends. And we see into each of their lives, and their relationship takes a dark and disturbing turn. I'll say that.
Okay.
I won't say why it's called the Einstein Letter, because you don't find out until it's 90 minutes straight through. You find out probably in 80 minutes why it's called the Einstein Letter. So I think that would be foolhardy of me to reveal at this point. Maybe someday somebody will see it.
So you had a terrific stage reading. So now what's the next step?
The next step, as I said, there's some potential and there's some interest, but first of all, I know this guy, I won't say his name, Michael Carenti, because I don't like to badmouth people on the internet, but I ran into him. I used to be so circumspect. If you look at my Facebook feed, I will never say anything bad about, or that I didn't like anything in the arts. Because first of all, I may want to work with that person, but second of all, that's not our job. Our job is to be supportive of each other. And I'm very foul-mouthed about other people's work privately, but not publicly. However, I ran into him at the Mondrian Hotel in Los Angeles, and I was there doing some work on some terrible pilot project or something. And he said to me, and I had a long history with him. He's one of the first people who gave me a start in a way. But anyway, so I ran into this guy, And we're in the lobby of the hotel, and he says, Nicky Silver. I go, Michael Correnti. I go, blah, 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 because we're not saying his name. And I say, what are you doing in Los Angeles? Because I knew him from New York. And he said, oh my God, my movie's going to get made, and De Niro's going to be in it, and Ellen Barkin's going to be in it, and this person's going to be in it. And he rattled off like 20 names in the first minute that I was standing there with him. And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, looking for work, because I wouldn't talk about what I was doing there. And then he rattled off another 20 names. And I said, you should really work on getting more names of famous people into the first 2 minutes of every conversation. And he looked at me and he went, you were an asshole 15 years ago, and you're an asshole now. And everyone in the lobby stared, and he stormed off. Now, he stormed off, but he didn't leave the hotel. So I waited in the lobby for him to walk past again. Not to apologize, just to sort of show him that I was not daunted by his shrieking that I was an asshole at him. I probably was an asshole. I might be an asshole. I don't really think I'm an asshole. Someone recently said of me in an email that was shown to me that I was an asshole. But this is someone I don't get along with. I mean, I don't think theaters would have me back, and every theater I've ever worked with has invited me back. So I don't think that's the case. I could be wrong. I shouldn't have said that. Edit that out. You don't edit these things. All right.
I don't. I'm
going to have a polo. They're sugar-free, no carbs. Lots of xylitol to give me stomach cramps. My diet program is that I eat enough xylitol the first half of the day that I'm in excruciating pain by the second half of the day and no longer consider eating an option. You thought it would be a chore to interview me. It's like pulling teeth to get me to answer a question. I know.
No, I'm more worried about taking up your time. It's going to go longer than I expected, but it's wonderful. It's going to be wonderful.
Where am I going?
How much of your work is pulled from life experience?
None. Now, that said, there's always, first of all, tiny little autobiographical details in my work because that's the world I know. So, for instance, now I have polos in my mouth while I talk, but I'm assuming I'll shove them like a squirrel into my jowls. What was the question? Oh, autobiographical. That's the world I know. So like in Raising Captivity, I just pulled that one out of thin air, but Bernadette's husband is a dentist because at the time my brother-in-law was a dentist. And my plays are generally, are inspired by a quandary, really, in my life. But story-wise, they have nothing to do with me. Absolutely nothing to do with me. I mean, I certainly was never marooned on a desert island. I never raped my mother, or killed her as in Fat Men in Skirts. I never, when I wrote The Lyons, my father was alive and well. He was diagnosed, however, with Parkinson's, which was the wrong diagnosis, we found out later. But that started me thinking about my father's mortality. And so it's that's the relationship to autobiography. I do think, and for instance, in that play, as I say, my father was alive and well. My sister was never an alcoholic. She does have 2 children. Their names are not Chad and Jeremy. But in that play, for instance, like an autobiographical detail, I did have the Judy Garland and Carnegie Hall album, and my father did throw it away. So he was probably just sick of hearing Swanee. So like that went in the play. But they're not autobiographical. There's little tidbits of things. My mother used to come. She's dead now, but she used to come and she would enjoy finding the tiny facts that were from our lives or my life or her life. But the stories are certainly not. I tend to write 2 kinds of plays. I write although I haven't written an actual farce in a long time, and there's a reason for that. But I write the farces that are like The Food Chain is a farce, The Altruists is a farce. And those are plays where I actually have an opinion, where I'm sort of out to prove a thesis statement. In The Food Chain, it's that there's a finite amount of happiness to be had, and thin and beautiful people get it. In The Altruist, it's that there is really no such thing as actual altruism, that all altruism is based in selfishness, even if it's just because it makes you feel so good to be altruistic.
It's so much fun. That's such a fun piece.
I enjoy it. It still gets done. Most of them get done. Some don't get done, but most of them get done. And I loved, because the characters are young, I actually, many years ago, directed a production of it at NYU with NYU students. And it was tremendous fun to do with people, who were in their 19 and 20-year-olds. It was great. And I loved it. I thought they were great. I've lost touch with one of them that I really would like. Darius, if you should see this, find me. They didn't think I was an asshole. I feel terrible. I really ought not to have admitted that somebody called me an asshole in a reading.
I think we've all been through there. I get called more often than I probably know.
I'm shocked. Because I think I'm the kindest, sweetest soul. But not according to Michael Corrente or this guy. Anyway, then the serious plays are usually me sort of, as I said, exploring a quandary or navigating something in my life. Even Pterodactyls, which is sort of the first play that was professionally produced. It was really exploring my reaction to the United States and its reaction to the AIDS epidemic at the time. So I'm trying to figure something out, how to deal with something myself. But then you asked such a simple question. The answer to your question is they're not autobiographical.
No, no, you're going in depth more than I could even ask for. So that's great. On that note, I want to touch base on one thing. Fat Man with Skirts was quote unquote your first play.
No.
Okay.
I finished college at the age of 13 because I don't know how old I was. I was 20. I was young because I was always a year ahead. I was born in December, and December, I guess maybe a January kid, their parents had the choice to start them or hold them one more year. So I was always like one of the youngest in my class. And then I didn't go to 12th grade. I went early admission to NYU, where you get your high school diploma after your first year of college. I don't know if they still have that.
Wow.
Well, I was pretty young when I graduated. And when I graduated, I wrote my first play, full-length play called Bridal Hunt. And I gave it to my friend, a woman named Robin Sachs, who worked at the theater that did Once Upon a Mattress. The Phoenix Theater. I don't know what year this was. And she, without to say, do you think I can be a playwright? And that's what I wanted to be in the theater very badly. I always wanted to be in the theater. That's why I got to leave early admission and go to the theater program, because I had a very clear direction. I wanted to be in the theater. And without telling me, she gave it to the head of script development at the Phoenix Theater, and they loved it. And they said, we want to do a reading of this play. Now, they did a reading of it. It was a very sophomoric play, filled with filth. And the end of the first act, a young girl on the eve of her wedding seduces her brother in an effort to make him heterosexual. The lack of logic in this doesn't, or the creepiness of it doesn't seem to enter her mind. But the stage direction reads, because they're standing behind a couch, women are wonderful, women are this, whatever. She kisses his neck, women will do this. And then it says, she sinks out of view down below the couch. And it says, with a full mouth is the stage direction. She might even do this if you buy her things. I mean, I was like 20. And they prepared me for, and then the father walks in, he just goes, "Oh, pumpkin." They prepared me at the Phoenix Theater for walkouts at intermission, that their audience for subscribers was old people. Well, you could not get vulgar enough for these old people. They were in ecstasy. Now, within 48 hours, the Phoenix Theater announced that after 30 years in the business, they were shutting their doors. So I feel that I shut down the Phoenix Theater. So then that was actually my first play. Then I wrote a bunch of other plays, but then AIDS really came and I didn't write anything for a long time. And I was walking down the street one day and Michael Corrente walks up to me and he says, "Are you Nicky Silver?" I said, "Why? What's it to you? Who wants to know?" I thought maybe I owed him money. And because I was unbelievably poor. And I was working in a restaurant and working in retail and jobs. And he said, "You wrote a play called Bridal Hunt, didn't you?" And I said, "Why? What's it to you?" And he said, "Well, I have this theater company, and we rent space. And there's 6 of us. We're all in our 20s. I would commission you to write a play." I thought that play was great. And I said, all right. I had an agent, I think at the time, Bill Craver, Writers and Artists, but I never spoke to him. I was quite terrified of him. I got the agent out of, I think it was him, because I've had a lot. In the beginning, I had a lot, particularly. Out of the reading, I invited agents. And but he had a long white beard, and he looked like either the man who owned Community Chest or death, actually. And so I was very much afraid that he was going to harvest my soul. So I never really spoke to my agent at the time. I put his name on things. Maybe he wasn't even my agent. Maybe I just put his name on it. It's a long time ago. So Michael Carenti commissioned me. He said, I need a play with a bare stage for 6 actors, 3 men and 3 women. And I wrote a play called Artists and Concubines, which was on a typewriter. So all the characters had very, very short names, because I didn't want to type long names over and over again. And it was pretty bad, but he did it at a place called the Sanford Meisner Theater, which was just a little black box on the median strip at 11th Avenue in Chelsea. And the man who ran it was a man named Bob Coles. There's another Robert Coles somewhere in the theater, but Bob Coles ran the Sanford Meisner Theater, which had nothing to do with Sanford Meisner. He just named it after him to try to get some publicity. So, and he said to me, listen, I think you're a good writer. I think you have a lot of promise as a writer. I can't always rent the space. Would you like to do plays here when I can't rent the space? I'll just give it to you for 4 weeks. And I said, sure. So literally for the next 6 or 7 years, when he couldn't rent the space, he would call me and he would say, you have 4 weeks starting January 1st, because the dead of winter was usually hard and August was very hard. So usually it timed out like that. And I would sit down and write a play really fast. My friends were in it. The previous rental would load out Sunday night. We would meet at midnight once they were out, build the set. The cast would show up the next day. Hopefully the paint would be dry. And we would rehearse for their first time on the set. They would rehearse Monday and Tuesday, maybe just Monday, I don't remember, on the set. And then we would start performances, because you only got 16 performances in a showcase where nobody got paid contractually. And so we had to start right away. Rehearsals were done at the Harlequin Rehearsal Studios, which is probably gone now, that I paid for with my waiter money or retail money, because I had 2 different jobs. And it used to be on 46th Street. And it was right, the Harlequin Rehearsal Studio door was here, and the Gaiety Male Burlesque are both hands. Why aren't both hands in it? Do you see 2 hands?
I see 1 hand.
Where? Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Oh, okay. The doors were next to each other, the Harlequin Rehearsal Studio and the Gaiety Male Burlesque. And many's the time I took the wrong door, and it was hours before I realized my mistake. Anyway, so that's how. So my first play there was a play called Liars, Pinheads, and Geeks. Now, my friend Chuck Coggins, who was my best friend at the time, worked at a die cutting place, and he made us postcards that were like oversized postcards, and I wanted them all to look the same, like Run DMC ads. They were just block white letters: liars, pinheads, and ampersand, geeks. And I did like 12 shows there. Fat Men in Skirts we did there, and some nights we would have 4 people in the audience. By the end of my tenure there, we had built up some audience, meaning we might have 30 people there. It only held 50, so 30 felt fine. Fat Men in Skirts, we were doing with Chuck was in it, Chuck Coggins, Stephanie Weatherton, Bill Crisp, and Deborah Risen. Look, it's 35 years ago. And there was literally no budget. It was supposed to take place on the beach, but we couldn't afford sand. That's how poor we were. We couldn't afford sand. So I marbled the stage, and I remember 6 a.m. I'm marbling the stage.
Wow.
By myself with a feather. I had very, very humble beginnings. And Howard Shalowitz, for no reason at all, except I guess he was intrigued by the title, which was the purpose of those titles, to try to get somebody to come, like a shocking title. And he loved it. And he then said, I want to do it. So the following year, it opened at the Woolly Mammoth. And that was my first production where actors got paid. It certainly wasn't my first play. And it was supposed to open with a play called David's Red-Haired Death in Rep by a wonderful woman named Sherry Kramer. It was a big hit. David's Red-Haired Death came and went, and Fat Men in Skirts, he would acknowledge at the time, pretty much revitalized their theater. They had a staff of 3 they were down to. And after Fat Men in Skirts, they were back to their staff of like 12. It was a big hit. And it got reviewed in the New York Times. Did nothing for my career. 0, zilch, nada. I continued to do plays showcases. No, but they did it at the Magic Theater. But at a certain point, I felt like this was diminished returns, and I just felt really, really tired, and it was getting nowhere. And I was about 30, and that was when people start giving up. They go, okay, this isn't working, and I'm going to find another career. So, but I had no other career in mind or skills. I had no other skills, which isn't 100% true, but pretty much I had no skills. And it just never occurred to me to give up. And so at that point, the next play I wrote, I mean, there were like 2 more, I think, after Fat Man, or 3 more. But the next one I wrote was Pterodactyls. And I had it in my mind, I wasn't going to do it as a showcase. I was going to myself send it out to theaters. And I knew a couple of people at theaters now who had come down. Tim Sanford, who eventually became the artistic director at Playwrights, but he was just a literary intern. But I knew him because he had come to see a couple plays of mine. And Bruce Whitaker at Manhattan Theater Club. So I wrote Pterodactyls, and every theater in New York did readings. Nobody would do it except the Vineyard. And so that sort of put me on the map. That's my biography.
I like it. Now, since you were talking about sand for Fat Men in Skirts, and then we're talking about Pterodactyls, which you and I talked a little bit the other night about the bones, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. At what point when you write do you say, it's out of my hands? I don't care. You know.
What's out of my hands?
Anything that you write. It's like, yes, this might be when I do commentary with the young playwrights that I work, we talk to them about, like, tone down your stage direction, your set pieces, else you may not, may hurt your chance of being produced. Whereas you've got these Tyrannosaurus Rex bones, you've got, the sand or the beach. It's like,
but first of all, stage directions are a very different thing, because I think my stage directions are generally pretty minimal, actually.
Oh no, that's true.
The stage directions that are published in the acting editions of plays or in the glossy paperbacks are, this is the gesture that goes with glossy paperbacks. Glossy paperbacks are the stage directions that I typed in when I wrote the play. They're not stage manager stage directions, which is often the case. So I think they're pretty minimal. And I think I was always aware that a play has 1 set, maybe 2, if you can conceive yourself of how you can do it very cheaply. Fat Men in Skirts does have sand, but it's only 1 set. Furniture is placed on the sand for the second act, a doorway on the sand. That's pretty cheap. I'm very aware of the economics of producing play. The Dinosaur it's a 1-room play. The one thing you'll spend money on is the dinosaur, but you could do it doesn't have to be realistic. The original production, the dinosaur was not realistic. It was done by a local artist. That yellow thing that was on the cover of American Theater Magazine. I got that in. I didn't mean to. I'm just saying that's how anybody who knows what that looked like, that's how you would know. That was not realistic. So I'm very, very well aware, and have always written very consciously to the expense of how you produce a play, and and they got a little more expensive as my budget got a little bit bigger at the Vineyard, but it's still, or Playwrights, but still very generally 1 room, maybe 2 rooms tops, never casts of more than 6. That's what can be afforded. You can write a play with 100 people in 1 million locations, but it's not going to get done. So, but that's a very different question from when do I let it go?
When you add those things, yeah. At what point do you say it's out of my hands? You deal with it
after the first New York production closes.
Okay.
I go to every production meeting. I always say when I write a play, and everyone is different, I picture every element. I hear every element. I hear every sound cue. I see every costume. I see every color of light that's being used. I have an opinion on the color thread used to hem the costumes. And I'll say to people, this is what I saw. This is one way to do it. I'm not saying it's the only way to do it. Absolutely not. But this is what I saw. Now take that or leave it for what it's worth. And sometimes the Lyons, for instance, I thought was in a white, sterile cube. Well, first of all, the hospital room was sort of more realistic than I envisioned in my mind, and it was green for the most part. Hospital rooms, I guess, aren't white, really, because it looked like a real hospital room. So, and things are usually backwards. I always picture what stage left ends up being on stage right, set-wise. I don't know why that is. But I always have but I go to every production meeting, and I will sometimes, I mean, I'm not stupid in that I certainly am, I'm never negative. You know, I didn't say, my God, it has to be white. But, and I don't impose my vision on anybody. You don't get good work out of people if you impose your vision on them. So I try to be encouraging, even when it veers away. Now, that said, for instance, we were in tech with costumes for Raised in Captivity, and the character of Roger had on a baseball cap, and it says in the script he was wearing a do-rag. And I said, why is he wearing it? I whispered to David Warren, like, why is he wearing that fucking baseball cap? And he said, it's just tech, just calm down. I said, fine. I sat there, and David stopped, and he said, let's just stop for a second. Nicky is pouting very loudly, so let's swap out the baseball cap for a do-rag. And they did. But generally, it'll be one or two things, like little things like that. It makes it sound like I'm very dictatorial. And I mean, maybe I am. It isn't about being dictatorial. It's about knowing that it can be done, and knowing what I see is a way to do it. For instance, and it's the same with dialogue, with landing a joke or a line of dialogue. This is the way I hear it. Linda Lavin said almost nothing the way I heard it, and I would never have tried to get her to say it the way I heard it, because she brought a connection that was so miraculous, and she is so naturally comic. But I don't. So it isn't about being dictatorial for me. It's about seeing it as a whole, and I think this comes from the fact that I don't come from I don't come from plays from a literary point of view. I come from them from an event. A play is something, and the theater in general is something that happens in a room in real time with people up there and people out here, and those people are telling a story to these people. I don't think of it as a book. Now, that said, I also am of the firm opinion, I had a stroke mid-sentence. I'm also of the firm opinion that the rhythm and music of every sentence is as important as the content, and that extends to the scene and to the evening. So, although I say I don't come from it from a literary point of view, I do come from it from a lingual point of view. And my experience started out all those years at the Vineyard. I was at Sanford Meisner Theater doing those showcases. I was directing them. So, and sometimes, and building the set and painting the set. And I never hung lights because I'm afraid of heights. But, but so my sort of approach is a very holistic. This is the thing I'm making, not this is the script I'm writing.
When you say
it sounds like I'm a terrible control freak. I probably am. But as I say, I try not to. I'm very conscious of it, and I try not to be controlling. My God, I ended up with transparent walls in one production, which is not something I would have ever wanted. So I try to let it go, encourage and let it go.
When you say it's an event, and it's this group of people telling this group of people a story, is that why you frequently break the fourth wall and your characters directly talk to the audience?
Yes.
Is that where that stems from?
I was in a play when I was at NYU at La Mama called Total Eclipse. And it was not a great production. I played Rimbaud. I had a nude scene. I was 17 and I fasted down to really like Dachau-like proportions. I was so emaciated. It's very tasteful of me, I know. But I was so thin. I was so terrified to be naked. And I was only naked for like the first two shows. And I think the director went, oh God, put him in some clothes. And they put me in period underwear, which literally covers you from like foot to jowl. So I was in this play with this guy whose name I really don't remember, or I would say it, as you can tell. And he was playing for Lane. And we had most of our scenes were together. And I couldn't stand him. I really just couldn't stand him. He was just, and his approach to acting was very different from my approach to acting at the time. And I'm not an actor. But at the time, I was being an actor, so I had an approach, meaning that like he thought something was important. He would sort of act a lot, And I thought when something's important, you try to make it as simple as possible. And I still believe this, and I still use it in plays, and I used it in this reading. I'll explain how. But so I decided, and we were at La Mama, so there would be 200 people watching us every night. And one night I decided that instead of talking to him, since I hated him, I was going to say anything I could that made lingual sense to the audience. And just take, and what this did, so like you can't say, "Are you hungry?" to the audience because that requires a response. They'd have to answer yes or no. But you can say, "My God, it's already 3:00. Are you hungry?" Now, and I did it all night long. This was quite terrible, quite a mean, destructive thing to do on my part. The director was gone because we'd already opened. But what I learned a couple things. One, it distorts the play in that the character talking to the audience, no matter what you're saying, has the relationship with the audience. And thus, we believe the character talking to the audience, we identify with the character, and we take their side. So, since I do believe that a play is a small group of people telling a story to a larger group of people, hopefully they're larger, and I think all characters think the play is about them. They want the audience on their side. So given the opportunity, they will talk to the audience. It saves time too, but in terms of narrative. But that's a side effect. That's something else. If an actor says, "Why am I talking to the audience here?" I'll say it's because you're about to do something horrible and you don't want us to, you just want us on your side. So you want to have a relationship with us, or you've just done something horrible, or you just, because you think the play is about you and you haven't had enough time with them. If it's a small part, I'll say that.
Going back,
I shocked you into abject silence.
No, because there's so many places I want to go, and I want to make sure that I go back to other things that you mentioned. So going back to you mentioned 6. You never use 6 characters.
No, never more than 6.
Never more than 6. So on that note, because I wanted to ask this, and now I'm wondering if this is the answer, because in Fat Men in Skirts, you have 4 characters that are played by 2 actors.
No, I have 6 characters played by 4 actors.
Right, but the father and the doctor.
Yeah, you said the wrong numbers.
Played by, what's that?
You just said the wrong numbers. It's 6 characters played by 4 actors.
Right, but there's 4 of those 6 are played by 2 actors.
Oh, all right. Oh my God. All right. Sorry. I do apologize.
No, not at all. So my point is, the reason why I'm asking, I'm like, okay, is that the reason why? Because you were trying to, how would that play have changed? You did this intentionally. So how would that play have changed?
It wouldn't. How would it have changed? That isn't why.
If somebody else played those characters.
Do you want to know why?
Yeah, I do. That's why I'm asking.
It wouldn't change. I mean, it would change if you did it without doubling. It would change, and I think it would hurt the play.
Right. That's why I want to know. I'm curious.
Yeah, it would hurt the play because the play would feel asymmetrical, because the audience is aware. When you double, and Raised in Captivity doubles, a bunch of plays of mine. I don't know others. I'm sure others double, but when you double, you're never trying to fool the audience.
Right. And
it would feel lopsided to the audience emotionally if these 2 actors have big parts in the first half of the play, or the first 2/3 of the play, and then they're gone forever. The audience has a relationship with those beings, whether they're the character or the actor. That being, I have a relationship with them. So it was important to find a way to include them in the second half of the play. In the Lyons, in the very first draft, I don't think Ben has a speech in Act 2, and the audience, I am the audience, missed him. I am the audience. I can only write a play that I like or that I want to see. So I'm always just trying to write a play that I like more. I can't judge or guess what you're going to like or what they're going to like. I can only guess what I like. So I'm just always trying to write a play that I like more. How old are you?
50.
Look at how much hair you have. Go on.
How would you describe your work?
So dark. What?
How would you describe your work?
Varied.
Very?
Yeah. I describe it as varied. I don't describe my work. It's not my place. Okay. I'm asked that a lot. I mean, people say, "What kind of plays do you write?" Well paginated. I don't know how to describe my work. I mean, I've been described by others. I used to get Joe Orton a fair amount. Then the New York Times referred to me as the love child of Edward Albee and Neil Simon. My work is a mix of, and some, I think the Washington Post once said something about that it's a mix of deep pain and shallow laughter. My work is a mix, usually, of that, of literary pretension and lowbrow humor.
When you were posting about your stage reading for the Einstein Letter, you'd mentioned that there were 3 trigger warnings.
There were like nothing trigger warnings. There were a lot of trigger warnings.
And you felt bad because there were probably some that you missed. So it just seems like nowadays, like, people are a little too sensitive, but
not me.
That's what I love about it, because it's like,
I am the person. I'm not too sensitive. I think that, first of all, I think trigger warnings, with the exception, which we've always had, of strobe lights for epileptics.
Sure.
But, with that exception, I think trigger warnings are a destructive thing, actually, because to communicate with an audience, you have to shock them. You have to keep them awake. You used to be able to shock them with subject matter when I started out. There is no subject matter that can shock an audience anymore. And the audience that comes to see, that comes to the theater is relatively sophisticated. So you shock them actually stylistically, hopefully. You shock them by changing genre in the middle of the play, if you can do it, if you're have a sense, if it makes sense for the play. You don't just do it arbitrarily. But and surprising them that way. And I think trigger warnings often deplete the ability to surprise. Because if you read the trigger warning, all the trigger warnings, you have a sense of what's going to happen sometimes. So I think I'm against them. But it's not up to, they didn't ask me if they could have them. They just do them.
Right. Well, you said that you shock in that regard, but I think you shock linguistically too.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think I shock. You mean the actual words? You mean the dirty words?
Some of them, yeah. It's like, oh my God, oh wow. And
are
so,
there dirty words that shock people?
What's that?
Are there dirty words that shock people?
Yeah, I think so. Or just phrasings that maybe you don't expect to hear in the theater.
One in the theater anymore. Name one.
Name one word that shocks the.
Yeah,
I would say that the C word is shocking to most. Yes.
Well, here in England, they use cunt the way we use shit in America.
Yes,
it's so common here. I've used the word cunt in plays. I certainly use the word fuck in plays, but I don't think an audience in context is shocked by that word.
Well, I think that we got.
I think you could. I use the word faggot in the Einstein Letter in a context that I think shocked people, but only because. But they're shocked and they're shocked. They're shocked because the word has become so politically forbidden in this woke era. And I'm not anti-woke. Him, them, whatever you want to be called. Cost me nothing. But it is important that character is quoting someone else, calling him that, and the effect it had on him. And you have to hear the word. And I said, when you get to that, and it's the climax of a paragraph, hit it and let it ring out and let there be air after it. So the audience has to live with it for a moment. And they were probably shocked to hear that word because they haven't heard it in a long time. But I don't think dirty words, politically charged words, certainly the N word, which I won't say here.
Is it in one of your plays or not? I want to. Okay.
No, there are characters who express racist views in a couple, in at least one. Certainly in the Altruists.
Yes, definitely, sure.
Inadvertently, they think they're being liberal, but they express racism. But the N word doesn't appear in any place of mine, and I wouldn't feel comfortable myself. But when I taught at NYU, I would say you have to remember you are not speaking. That character is speaking, and it's important that all words are available to you. that said, it would take a great deal of courage for a white playwright to put the N-word in a character's mouth at the moment. At the moment. It wasn't the case, certainly. All in the Family could not be on television.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I think this is unfortunate, but I live in the culture. I don't create it.
Sure. Because of that, because of the shock value, for lack of a better phrase,
I never use the word to shock. I've never used a word to shock. Even the word faggot in this last play, I knew it would be, but that isn't why it was there. It was there because of its effect on the character who is recounting the story.
Let me rephrase that. The shocking aspect of those words being uttered. Do you get complaints? Do you get people that like, this is inappropriate? Do you get people that walk out, or?
Very seldom, very, very seldom. And only the last time it happened was at a matinee at the Lyons, and a woman came up with an inappropriate, probably a child who was inappropriately there. I don't think that's English. Inappropriately there, for whom it was inappropriate to be there.
Sure.
It said there were a lot of F-bombs in the first act. Are there as many? She asked the house manager. I was standing next to her. Is there as much dirty language in the second act? And I intervened and I said, that's all the second act is. It's a great chorus of dirty words. And for 45 minutes, and then we leave. And so I don't think she came back. I think they gave her tickets to another Schubert show, like, I don't know, that she might enjoy more. Maybe Wicked. If that might be Nederlander show. I don't know whose it is. But anyway, but very, very, very seldom. Because I think people who come to see a play of mine, not that they know what to expect, but I do get probably, because I'm not on the Broadway very often, once only, but they're more sophisticated than that, than to be shocked by, dirty language or even inappropriate language. I mean, on the other hand, the first big laugh, and we knew what the house was going to be like in the Lyons, is, what the fuck are you talking about? But it's not shocking because he said of the word. It's shocking because you're watching Linda have this opening monologue sort of, and he has uttered a couple quiet, like, oh my God, or whatever. And he's in a hospital bed and you think he's going to die or something. And it's the size of it that is shocking. And that's why people laugh. Not because he says the word fuck, but the size of what the fuck. And it's in italics with 3 exclamation points in the published edition. And it has to have that size because that's the opening salvo in a battle.
What do you say to What do you say to people who find your subject matter inappropriate?
Well, they don't confront me very much. I would say you would be happier going to see the play that goes wrong. You should go see that.
Okay.
I make no apologies for it or explanation of it. I don't know what I'm not even sure what's in it. I mean, you could look at Fat Men in Skirts, which is a play that has probably the least appropriate human conduct of any play ever written. Certainly any play I've ever written. And I've gotten very, moldy in my old age. I mean, my plays are a lot more appropriate. The behavior is much more appropriate in many of them. The Fat Men in Skirts, this mother and son marooned in a desert island, and he does rape her at the end of Act 1. He does kill his father. He kills his father's mistress and eats her. These are not appropriate things. This is not going to, get you through charm school. But if anyone comes to see that play, my guess is they're coming to see a play called Fat Men in Skirts. They probably have a sense that it's going to be shocking, and nor is it ever held up as a paradigm of behavior. I try not to. I love pretty much all the characters I've ever written, with 1 or 2 specific exceptions. But I pretty much love them, and think of them as existing people, and don't judge them. Even Bishop, I love Bishop. Some I can't remember their names, but I remember Bishop's name. I hold people up as paradigms. A play that comes to mind that was very controversial, which was The Beautiful Child, which was about the parents of a child molester. And because I present the child molester's point of view at one point in a sort of lengthy monologue about, to him, what he was experiencing, and he, with this young man who was 8 years old. We never see the young man. I knew I couldn't have an actor play that. That he experiences that as love. He doesn't say that in that language, but it has to do with, he throws his stones in the river. They symbolize his sins from this religious ceremony. And he takes the last stone and he puts it in his shoe and he walks on it until his foot is bleeding, and he keeps walking on it until his skin grows around the stone and the stone is part of him. And the holy man says, "Why have you kept the stone?" He says, "Because that stone is love." So to him, this sin, and he knows it's a sin, but it's also love. Now, because I allowed him to say that, I think people thought I was endorsing or siding with him. Quite the contrary, his sort of comeuppance, or his the justice that is doled out to him, is that his eyes are put out by his father. Well, this seems like a relatively severe punishment. So I don't think that if you really look at the play, that anybody could say that I'm endorsing any kind of behavior. I do think it's important, though, to look at all human behavior and realize we are all humans. And no, none of us, even Putin, even Hitler, I mean, these are examples that strain the theory, but none of us are two-dimensional monsters. We're three-dimensional human beings. And the question of that play is not, do we as an audience forgive him or not? The question of that play is, how do his parents find a way to love him? This is their child, and he is a monster even to them. How do they love him? So he had to present his case, really, for his behavior. And I realized it was a very difficult play for the audience, for me to write. And I had a real nervous breakdown when we were in rehearsal. And I realized, I'm very often writing about something and don't realize I'm writing about it until much later in rehearsals. I was really writing about when I was 4 years old, and both of my parents are dead now. So I think I've talked about it in interviews, but when I was 4 years old, my parents put me into therapy to cure me of being gay. Clearly, the cure didn't take. But that was really what that play was about. I didn't know it until I saw it on its feet, and I would just be walking down the street and burst into tears about their rejection of this child, of their child. So I didn't know that's what I was writing about, but that's what I was writing about. And it was it was not a fun play to write. And sometimes even a very serious play is a great fun play to write because it's sort of exercising things and that sort of thing. It was a challenging play to write. And so, like, that behavior is certainly inappropriate. But but the play doesn't condone the behavior, for God's sake. It puts his eyes out. My favorite line got cut because it sort of turns into a trial about what do we do about him. And their decision is, we'll put out his eyes so that he never sees another child. Mm. And there was a line that he's headed upstairs, and I don't remember the setup. All I remember is the punchline, which was scalpel, letter opener, potato. And but I cut it eventually, so it didn't make it into the play.
What? Why did you cut it?
I don't know. It didn't fit the moment.
Okay. How do you plan your layers? I mean, because you're talking about, like, you're writing, you don't realize you're tackling the subject matter that you are. I mean, you plan these out, and no. How do you map it out prior to sitting down to write?
You don't, and I don't think you can, nor do I think you should. I think, and this is again something I used to tell students at NYU, poor saps overpaid to hear me babble week after week after week. Writing a play, the most important element of writing a play is starting at the right time. And by that, I mean, you have to know enough about the play that your conscious mind is not occupied figuring everything out. But if you know everything about a play, your subconscious, yeah, that's right, as opposed to unconscious, I constantly get them backwards. Your subconscious will not be stimulated if you know everything, because then you're just connecting dots. When you write a movie for a movie studio, you have to turn an outline that's almost as long as the movie. Your subconscious has no part in it. You're not going to get anything other than what you actually have mapped out already with your conscious mind in terms of plot. Now, how do you know when you've hit that moment where, with the Lyons, I did know I was writing sort of about my father's mortality and everything. But how do you know when you're at the point where I know enough that I can start, but I don't know everything? If I know everything, nothing's going to happen. I'm just filling out an outline. You don't. You guess. And I've written whole plays and been wrong. I knew too much when I started, and I could feel there wasn't a real emotional connection any longer to the material. I was just doing it. And sometimes I didn't know enough, and then you sort of flounder, so you guess. Now, luckily, I'm not a person who writes every day. I've gone, before the Lyons, I didn't write a word for about 6 years. I write when I am ready to write. That sounds very self-indulgent, but I don't see the point in it. And I used to panic if I went a year without writing a play. And I've written a lot of plays, and there's evidence of them out in the world. So it's a system that has sort of panned out to be about a new play every year and a half to 2 years. But sometimes it'll be 2 in a year, and sometimes it won't be for 5 years. After a play called Three Changes, which was so bad, I always say the intermission walkouts usually included half the cast. We're not watching any more of this crap. Get me out of here. I didn't write anything. I actually wrote very quickly a farce that I was in called The Agony and the Agony. And we just did it as a lab at the Vineyard, which I loved. It was the happiest time of my life. But I thought, I don't have a place in the theater. I have nothing to say. I'm not going to do it anymore. 5 years passed. And I felt like I wanted to write a play again. And it was a reaction to the last play. Three Changes had a lot of ideas. It was very cerebral. The Lyons, I wanted to write the simplest play I could. And I thought about it for a year. Not actively. I don't take notes. Once I've started, I keep a piece of paper and I'll write a sentence down to remember it. But that's it. So I wrote The Lyons, and it turned out to be, in many ways, my most successful play. So I no longer panic about not writing. I was starting to say, this person, I don't remember his name, Peter Napolitano. He lived near me when I was like in my early 20s, and I was trying to be a playwright. And he said, "Do you write every day?" And I said, "No." And he was a playwright. He wrote a play. I don't remember the name of it. I said, "No." He said, "Oh, well, then you won't really ever be a playwright." And I thought, well, fuck you. And I, of course, have earned a living as a writer for many years now, and I don't know where he is. So there you have it. I think there is no way to be a playwright. There is the way you find to be a playwright.
Are there any of your...
Spite is the great motivator in the world. Which
one is?
Spite. There's a woman named Adrian. I don't remember her last name. I worked at Mamie's Ice Cream Parlor on 8th and McDougal, also a restaurant. And the owner used to sit at the register with her friend Adrian. And Adrian studied at Uta. She was in her 40s or 50s. And she studied at Uta Hagen as a girl. And she was reading my work. And because she had some theater background, I gave her a play to read. And she said, you have to write about other things, and you have to do this and you have to do that. I don't think this is for you. And I remember her saying it to me 45 years later, and I'm still proving her wrong. Bitch.
Good for you. Good for you.
She was a nice lady, but wrong.
Yep. And then some. Are there any of your plays that you were not involved in the rehearsal process on their first production?
No. No.
How does that help?
I only ever missed 3 rehearsals for a first production. No, I don't. Depends on the director. Terry Kinney, when we work together, we are very. He trusts me, and we're very. This is a relationship he likes to have. He'll give notes on the scene and say, "Nicky, do you have anything?" And I'll give notes right to the actors. Mark Brokaw once thought I was talking to an actor about the play and yelled at me afterwards. I said, "We weren't. We're talking about something else." I would never give a note to an actor, ever, 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 ever. With in a production, that Mark was directing, and I've worked with Mark 3 times, with Terry 2 times. David Warren, I would give notes sometimes. I would never, of course, contradict the director. And it depends. Sometimes it can be a very helpful tool to the director because I can maybe say the same thing in a different language, or I can make an actor not feel ganged up on by having a note for somebody else. Mark, and I certainly respect 100% his point of view. There is no right way to direct a play. The way that works for you is the right way. But no, I only ever missed 3 rehearsals in my whole life. One because Bob Falls said to me, Hope Davis, because we had done Pterodactyls, and this was on Food Chain, is looking to you for approval when she should be looking to me. Would you stay away for 2 days? I said, absolutely. I had understood, had no problem with it. And I once missed a rehearsal of Pterodactyls because someone I knew was was going to court, and so I wanted to be there. Another story entirely. But I don't write plays to sit in my room. I go to every performance in New York. Every performance. I sometimes don't watch the matinees, and I never give notes. I protect the actors. And
How do you do that?
What?
How do you do that?
Well, for instance, at the Vineyard, which is a small space, Linda opened Too Much Sun with a monologue in one in front of a curtain. In one. I'm very showbiz. In one. My vaudeville roots. You'd think I was 80. I do not remember vaudeville. And the ushers were supposed to stop late seaters. Ushers, the volunteer usher, they were already watching the show, the house owner, and a latecomer was coming in, and I stopped them because it would have distracted her, and they were being noisy about it, and I took them by. It was a couple, and I took their wrists and I walked them into the lobby, and I said, "Here's your money back. Thank you." Kicked them out because it would have really thrown her to see these people wriggle their way into the 4th row. One night during the Lyons, they both involve Linda, but one night during the Lyons, her purse strap broke on her big exit when she throws her purse over her shoulder. I'm there to make sure that she has a new purse or that purse is repaired, and to make sure she's not upset about it. If they have a very bad show or a bad audience, I'm there to keep their spirits up afterwards. You'll get them tonight. You'll get them tomorrow. They were not our crowd. That's how I do it. Once there was a time, I don't know, nobody, I'll just tell it. What the hell? When Linda was nominated for a Tony and didn't get it, she was due at like 1:00 for a put-in rehearsal the next day. And at 12:30, I thought we should have sent her flowers. Well, the actor being put in, his agent had sent him flowers. So I said, I'll give you $20. Can I buy those flowers? He said, just have the flowers. I real quick changed the card. You're our winner. Love your company, the Lyons. And I left it in her dressing room. We literally passed. She was going in as I was going. She didn't think a thing of it. So then, real quick, company to the stage, please, for the put-in rehearsal. And everyone's there. And Linda's the last one, and I run to each actor and I say, you gave Linda flowers, you gave Linda flowers, you gave Linda flowers. And I didn't get to Dick Latessa. And so she goes to each person, she goes, and she kisses them, and she says, thank you so much for the flowers, I'm so sorry I didn't win. She kisses each person and thanks them. She gets to Dick Latessa, and my heart is racing. And I'm thinking he's going to say, what flowers? She says, thank you so much for the flowers. He goes, you deserve them, baby! And that's what a playwright does. Even
just, how long did you keep that secret?
Until today. I mean, I've told people privately, but now it's out in the public, and Dick is gone, and Linda will laugh if she hears it.
What are you afraid of?
In general?
Yeah.
Poverty.
Okay.
very afraid of poverty. I'm afraid I lead a life of abject solitude. I live alone. I have no partner. I've had no partner for years. I have no children. I have a sister in Philadelphia, but she has a family. So I am afraid of being elderly, poor, and ill. Those are the things of having no one to rely on. That frightens me. But it's not going to happen today or tomorrow.
Sure.
But my biggest fear is having no money. I had no money until I was in like early 30s. I remember, and my parents had money, and I could have gone to them, but I didn't want to. But I know what it is you buy rice and you buy a can of chicken broth and you cook it instead of water with the chicken broth, because at least it feels like something as opposed to rice. Now that makes it sound like, I was spending what money I had instead of on food at the time on rehearsal space. But that's a fear of mine. I'm not afraid of pain particularly. I mean, I've had kidney stones and I've had kidney stone surgery, and I'm not afraid of pain. What else are people afraid of? Heights. I guess I'm afraid of slowing down, but I don't know that I am. I don't mind slowing down in life. I mean, mentally slowing down. That I guess I'm afraid of that because I know I don't think of myself as particularly smart. I do think I'm particularly fast. I have a very fast mouth and a very fast mind. Compared to Richard Greenberg, for instance, I'm a dope, but he is not he doesn't speak as quickly, and he doesn't act. I don't know if he thinks as quickly, but I know that my rhythms are very fast, and this has served me well over the years.
Do your fears ever reflected in your work?
No. Poverty, I don't think I've ever written about a fear of poverty. Hey, there's an idea. I don't think I've ever written about a fear of poverty. Certainly, fear of loneliness is always in my work, but not fear of dying alone, old, but fear of being alone. But I don't have a fear of being alone, so that's interesting because I don't really have a fear of being alone because I've been alone. No, I don't.
What was or is your biggest struggle, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, well, who says I've overcome it?
What's that?
Who says I have overcome it?
Well, that's why I say what was or what is.
But you said, and how have you overcome it? My biggest struggle is self-acceptance, and I have not overcome it. It would be great if I didn't think I was one of the ugliest creatures God dropped on this planet. If I didn't look in the mirror, I tell people I know I have body dysmorphia because I look in the mirror and I see a huge fat man with an enormous dick. Now, both of these things, of course, are inaccurate. But self-acceptance, and I have none of it. I have physical self-acceptance, and this is a result. I know where it comes from. 100% I know where it comes from, but knowing that intellectually doesn't really do much good.
Can you share what that is? Where it comes from?
It's a combination of things. I think, one, it is having been very fat as a child and knowing that I was judged for that. I see myself as very fat and always will see myself as very fat and having a disgusting body. The play that speaks the most to me, or spoke the most to me when I read it, out of many, many plays, was The Transfiguration of Benno Blimpie by Albert Inarritu, which is about a man who's so fat that he poisons himself and lets the rats eat it. A very abstract one-act play, but it spoke very, 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 very it's strongly to me. And I do think that being put in therapy at the age of 4 sends a message of unworthiness that manifests itself in various ways throughout one's life. I don't have a fear of failure, having been one most of my life, and I don't have a fear of success, having avoided it most of my life. Because you were doing this interview, and it makes me sound like I think I'm this important person. I think I am on the periphery of the theater. I think that I have a place in the theater, but it isn't in the center. And there, I do have a certain following, but I'm not famous, and I don't. I'm very, very lucky that I've managed to survive and earn a living as a writer. But I don't think. I mean, I don't know who is. I mean, Tony Kushner is the center of the theater in our era. And tastes, but I was never in vogue. I guess for a minute, I was in vogue after like Pterodactyls, Raised in Captivity. But the kinds of plays that I write, which are the middle, which are not the play that goes wrong, and are not highbrow. They're really in the middle. They're accessible plays with some highbrow trappings, or they're highbrow plays with lowbrow trappings, one or the other. But that's always been where I live as an audience, where I live as a writer. It's what I liked when I moved to New York. It existed when I moved to New York. It barely exists now. And by that, I mean, when I moved to New York, there was Playwrights Horizons and Manhattan Theater Club and the WPA and the Phoenix Theater. These were the middle ground. Broadway was mostly boulevard comedies and maybe some big serious dramas, but mostly, Social Security with Marlo Thomas and Bernard Slade plays were the kind of things you saw on Broadway. And then you had downtown, you had La Mama, and you had the Mabou Mines, and you had experimental theater. And some of it was great fun. The Ridiculous Theater Company was great fun, but it was considered experimental theater. Now, the economics of theater have become so perilous that what would have been a Broadway play is now an off-Broadway play, is now Manhattan Theater Club and Playwrights Horizons and the Vineyard. And what would have been an off-Broadway play, I guess, is off-Broadway. And you still have experimental theater. And I also think that so it has been so the big marketplace of the middle has been squeezed out. I also think that the chasm between critical success and audience adoration has widened. Maybe it always was that wide, and I wasn't aware of it. But I do think that there are plays that are quite sort of lugubrious, and I'm not going to name names, and the favorite of critics. That I don't think mainstream audiences have much interest in seeing that kind of thing. They want to be entertained. I think that's my job. My job is to communicate. And to communicate, you have to entertain, you have to shock, to wake them up once they think they know what they're seeing. But you don't communicate if you sort of alienate them by being too cerebral in your approach. And I think that has become very important critically. And maybe it always was. I'm just aware of it. It didn't seem that way to me.
Emmanuel.
Bitterness. And I am. I'm not. I'm very fortunate.
Emmanuel Wilson from the Dramatists Guild, when I just interviewed him for the last episode we did. And the funny thing, he advised that you should be ready for Broadway.
One should be?
One should be ready for Broadway. It's if you want everybody's goal in the industry and playwriting, they want to go to, they want to be in Broadway. And he says, are you ready for it? Are you ready for Broadway? Were you ready for Broadway?
Well, he says seriously that all playwrights should be shooting for Broadway?
No. He's like, if that's what you're shooting for, you need to make sure that you're ready for Broadway. Not your play, but you personally.
Well, personally, yes. I'm quite ready for it. It's Broadway, the mythos, is that really a word? Of Broadway, didn't hold. It held less mystique than you might imagine for me. I mean, it was very exciting, and I thought it would be great economically, but within 2 minutes, I felt it's just another theater. There are more chairs in it, but I was having my Diet Coke at a chair in the wings the way I would at the Vineyard. So it didn't feel, it felt no different to me at all. Felt no different to me. Zero. The opening night party was very different, but that's actually about it. And very, very early on, this was I used very, very much, and I should stop it very, very quickly. I was like in college, so maybe 19 or 20 at the oldest. I was in the theater district, and Alec Baldwin and Jessica Lange were doing a revival of Streetcar. I think it was Streetcar. I hope I have this right. I may have distorted the facts in my addled brain. But for some reason, there was a door that was open, and I just walked in, and I snuck in, and I watched them rehearse. And it was one of the most profound lessons I ever got in the theater, because here were two movie stars rehearsing a Tennessee Williams play on a Broadway stage. And what were they doing? Holding their blue Samuel French, or DPS, acting edition scripts that even from way in the back, I could see there was yellow highlighter in. And they were sort of, well, what if I go over here? Now that feels funky to me. What if I go over doing it exactly the same way everybody else did it at every level? The way we did it in high school, the way we did it in college, the way we did it at the Vineyard, the way we did it at the Sanford Meisner, the way we did it on Broadway. Now, the difference is their instinct, hopefully, is either they were born with better instincts. I don't mean those two in particular, but the great actors are born with better instincts. And I've worked with many great actors, a handful that I think of as real geniuses. And it's just that their instincts, and in this case, they were born with them, are simply more developed and more spectacular. And it's possible to, I suppose, hone your instincts over time. That's the only difference. But they're figuring it out on their feet, just messing up and doing it the same way everybody else did it. And so that was a very, 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 very valuable lesson that I took, not from my college years, not from college. And I think it demystified the idea of what a Broadway show was. I'd been on Broadway. We did that Boys from Syracuse set, used to break down every night. And they used to shove me on the stage, sometimes me and Scott, to chat with the audience while they repaired the set. And I always liked that the best. I could, I'm good with the joke. So I was fine in front of the audience. It was better than the show. P.U. I'm telling you. Whew, smelled of ass. But, I mean, I wrote it. But, so it demystified it for me. So there was no I was ready for it. Sure. It didn't change my life in any way. The next play, and I didn't get flooded with offers to do the next play on Broadway or anything. Nothing. So, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. I tried very hard. I remember the last day, Linda gave us a curtain speech, and I remember thinking during that show, because I loved the play. And by the way, it's my most sort of mainstream play that shocks the least. But that play, you come back for Act 2, you're in a different kind of play. And that's how that play shocks. All of a sudden, you're in a completely different kind of play. And then you return to the first one, so that when you think you have your bearings, you don't have your bearings. Thinking to myself that to stay present and be in the moment through the entire day, because it was a goodbye to a special production of a special play that I felt very proud of and close to. You don't always feel that way. Sometimes, as you know, you go, oh God, how much longer is this going on? But you still go, thank you so much, when people tell you they liked it. Thank you so much.
You mentioned earlier that the Einstein Letter may be your favorite.
Oh, did I say that?
Yeah.
It may be. Who knows? I don't know yet. I haven't seen it full.
Do you have a favorite?
I have a couple favorites. I mean, I love the Lyons. I love Raised in Captivity. Those sort of, and then really maybe Fat Men in Skirts. Fat Men in Skirts, because of the rawness of it. And I couldn't write that play. I'm not that person. I don't have that kind of violence inside of me anymore, thank God.
Where do you think that came from?
Pardon?
Where do you think that came from to get that play?
Desperate need for attention, mostly. I was just desperate to be noticed. And so the wilder I could make it, the better it worked out. There are a couple plays. Then there's a bunch of plays that I like, that I think are good. and sound. I like the Altruists. I like the food chain. I like Pterodactyls. The problem with Pterodactyls, I might love it, but the problem with Pterodactyls is it simply cannot have the impact that it had when it was written, because saying I have AIDS was a death sentence. And knowing that intellectually doesn't put you in the same place to watch the play. So it can't have the same impact. Then there's some plays that I think are turds.
And I want to ask that in a second, but is Todd in denial, or is he trying to convince himself that he's not? What's that?
He's telling the truth.
Okay.
That he has no symptoms, that he's perfectly fine, and that he never dies.
That I'm not going to die. Yeah.
Well, that he's not going to die. Well,
I'm not dying. I think he says it like quite a few times.
That City has at the end of Act 1. I will go on. I will go on. I will go on. I will go on. I get emails still from actors in universities, mostly playing Todd, and they want to know: is Todd dead at the beginning of the play? Does Todd die during the play? Does he never die? Is he immortal? And I say, in response, you must choose the answer that keeps you active and that makes sense to you. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer. I know what I think about it, but I don't think there's no definitive answer given in the play. So I don't think, sometimes I would, but in case some actor hears it, I don't want to give a definitive answer.
Do you approach those questions the same way when they reach out? It's up to you. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer. You got to figure that out.
That's what I say. I say pick the answer. These seem to me to be the three possibilities. If you have a fourth possibility, tell me. These seem to me to be the three possibilities. You have to choose the answer that keeps you active in the play. Now, personally, I think dead before the play begins, which would make sense in the play, and he's a ghost the whole time. It's rough to stay active when you're a ghost.
All right.
In my mind. Maybe you have a different idea of what a ghost is, but I don't know. Your petty grievances sort of seem immaterial. I wrote a play called Siblings in Paradise about the three sisters, and it's explained to them by her professor that if there is an afterlife, all of our grievances and our troubles here become trivial and meaningless. And if there is no afterlife, then all of our troubles here and our grievances are really trivial and really meaningless. And that's sort of my take. So to me, dead before the play begins is not so helpful to an actor to keep him active. So, but I wouldn't say that to an actor. And we didn't discuss it in the original production. You'd be surprised how little thematic discussions there are of plays, or that the actors will ask questions, but they generally don't ask the theme. I think they think it's not their business. Their business is to stay active and serve the material, not to sort of interpret it.
I find that some of your work, there's some reoccurring themes.
Nothing but.
Yeah.
I'm trying really see how many different places I can put the same play in. Well, we've done a beach. We've done a living room. That's not 100% accurate, but I have obsessions.
Is there any particular reason why, or is there a message that you're trying to get across, or commentary that you're trying to make?
I do think there is a reason. I do think I write so much about families. Now, I have written plays that are not really about the family, and people don't seem to like them nearly as much. So I sort of gave up trying to rebrand myself. But like the Altruists didn't do very well, and it's really, there is a brother and sister in it, but it's certainly not about family.
Sure. I don't know why they wouldn't like it. I had so much fun reading that.
Thank you. And it has some really good jokes.
Yes.
But I do think two things. One, the family is our primary relationship, and what we carry, it is the one universal that all of us have. Even if you have no family as an infant and you're put up in an orphanage, your hunt for it, or your absence of it, the hole that it leaves is as present as our families. It is the one universal there is. I also think that all plays of any merit are family plays. Whether they disguise themselves as businessmen like Glengarry Glen Ross, it's a family play about brothers. I'm sure he would disagree, but that's what I think. I think all plays that are any good are ultimately family plays dressed up as something else. Because those are the relationships the husband, wife, son, child, son, daughter relationships are the core of who we are psychologically. I'm sure I could be proven wrong with very little effort.
What's your least favorite play of yours, or the stinkers that you said?
Well, Three Changes is a stinker. It has some there's a lovely speech in it. There are plays that I wrote when I was at the Sanford Meisner Theater that do not exist, that were written on a typewriter, and I don't have a copy, and I don't know the actors anymore, and maybe they don't have copies. I don't think Beautiful Child works. I don't think Free Will and Wanton Lust works. That said, I still like that play, certainly more than Three Changes. And Free Will and Wanton Lust has, the second act is comprised almost exclusively of two very long 25 or so minute monologues that remain among my favorite things I've ever written and have been done out of context and repurposed, as it were. I don't think Too Much Sun is a very good play. It's not a bad play. It's mechanical. I wrote it for a reason, as opposed to I wasn't really ready to write it. And it works, and it's okay, but I don't feel close to it. I'm very disappointed. I learned something working on This Day Forward. I quite like the play This Day Forward. It's certainly in the middle rung and towards the bottom of the middle rung. But it was an experiment. All plays are an experiment. I said at this reading, we get one day of rehearsal, and I said, all plays are an experiment. And although I've had 15 about plays produced, and I'm a beginner when I sit down to write a new play, and I directed the reading, and I said, sometimes, every now and then I feel like a professional playwright, but I never feel like a professional director. It was a lie to curry their favor. Wait, what I was talking about? Oh, so it was very much an experiment, This Day Forward, to write a play set in the late 50s that should feel like it was set in the late 50s. There's no curse words, there's no people of color, until the very last moment, and then the mask sort of falls to the thud, and then jump to the 2000s, and it should feel like a different play, and it's a continuation of the same story. Well, what I learned is audiences are really not interested in seeing a play from the late 50s. Now, maybe I'll be proven wrong with Plaza Suite, but that does have 2 movie stars. But my audience, in any event, was not interested in that experiment. They weren't. They just weren't.
You said that Beautiful Child doesn't work. Why doesn't it work?
Well, it doesn't work because the mix of comedy and drama, I shouldn't say drama because comedy is a form of drama, the mix of comedy and tragedy, or the mix of comedy and pathos is, it doesn't work in that play. The secondary, there's a comic relief character that is not integrated sufficiently or have high enough stakes, and that's why it doesn't work. I don't think it doesn't work because the drama of the play doesn't work. The drama of the play works fine. And there are scenes that I think are beautiful. I think the last scene between the mother and the father at the end of the first act, and it was the hardest scene that those 2 actors did, and they're brilliant, literally. And I have worked with actors I don't think are so brilliant, but very few, but I have worked with some. They're brilliant actors. It's a very elliptical play, the scene. And comedy very seldom has subtext. Comedy is the id being vomited out. Drama often has subtext, and that play is all subtext. And I remember Terry Kinney taking me into the hallway and saying he was really struggling with it because the actors were in the rehearsal room. And so I talked to him and I said, all they have to remember is she wants to be punished and he wants to be absolved from each other. So they're working at cross purposes. And that was what that scene was about. And they don't say it, they don't know it, but that's what they want. And she, Penny Fuller and George Grizzard, brilliant, was sobbing a lot in that scene. And it was important that he not touch her because they don't touch until the last moment of the play. And George said, it's not human. If she's sobbing, I even no matter what my feelings are for her, I feel like I want to put my hand on her. And I think Terry called him aside and said, she won't be sobbing when the time comes. Just bear with us. So I think that I don't think they're well integrated, the comedic aspect of the play, and maybe, and it's very likely that in that instance, the more dramatic element of the play can't actually bear it's too grim. I don't know that that's true. There's no such thing as too grim, so I don't really believe that. I just didn't do it very well. Does that make sense?
Yes. And then I have a question for you as well. When we produced the Maiden's Prayer in 20,
Maiden's Prayer is okay.
I think it was in 2000. I think we did it in 2009. Might have been 2010. We were told that this is a play that you don't necessarily let the rights out to very frequently. Is that true?
Well, you know, I'm only asked in majors in Los Angeles, New York, and London, so I don't know that it's come up. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't recall being asked very often and saying no, but I could be wrong. I have a mind that retains water.
Who influenced you? What made you want to become a playwright?
Well, it wasn't so much. I didn't. Well, those are two different questions. Who influenced me? What made me want to be a little bit? Because I wanted to be in the theater, but I didn't know how. I just knew I had to get into the theater, and I don't know because the first thing I ever saw in the theater, in the professional theater, was my parents took me to see the Fantastics and You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown on a weekend in New York when I was like maybe 8. And I thought it was a terrible bore, but I already knew I wanted to be in the theater. Or maybe I was younger than that because I knew it. I don't know how. I don't really know how. But the writers that influenced me very much were Joe Orton, John Guare, Edward Albee, Tennessee Williams, Neil Simon. Not really Neil Simon. That's really a lie. I never saw Neil Simon play. I wasn't. It is a lie. I mean, I now admire the craftsmanship of his jokes. Certainly. I mean, there's no better joke in the world than "You left me a note. Don't forget to pick up milk. F you." It took me 20 minutes before I realized F you stood for Felix Unger. Like, that's a great joke. You know? I don't really write that kind of joke, but I'm in awe of it. And I met Mr. Simon. He came backstage at the Lyons, and he was very generous to me. But I wasn't aware of Neil Simon as an entity. So I don't know. Those are the writers I admire. Sondheim made me want to be in the theater and want to be a playwright. Sondheim, 100%. I think Sondheim is probably the finest writer of theater in the last 50 years. Sondheim, John Guare, those two. Both of them are capable of writing Drek occasionally, Sondheim less often because he produced less, but are also capable of transforming the theater into something quite unique and magical. And because I don't think of Sondheim as a musician, I think of him as a maker of theater. So to me, he was as much a playwright as he was composer. And I know he had collaborators, but to me, he was the purpose and the maker of the theater. And when he died, I wrote something on Facebook about our greatest playwright has died. Yeah. And that's how I felt about him. So he was a very, 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 very big influence. I learned a lot. In Pterodactyls, all of them are on stage at the end of the first act having that contrapuntal sort of cross-purpose dialogue, which is a great scene. I mean, I like that scene, and it has great jokes, and it builds to a great climax because of Sunday in the Park with George. Because I remember seeing the first act, which is all there was then, of Sunday in the Park with George, and he didn't let everybody sing together until the end of the thing. They weren't all on stage together until the end. So I thought, oh, all right, I'll put them all on stage together. There's no reason for it, but I'll figure out the reason. So structurally, that was the influence.
You don't outline. Do you have a process, though?
I have a process server. I don't know what that means, except he's at the door. I'm about to be arrested. My process is, I think about a play for a while until I sort of have a sense of who a couple at least of the main people are, what the play is exploring, where it is happening, And then I start to write, and I write from Lights Up, Act 1, Scene 1. I don't write Act 1 because there may only be one act. Like Food Chain was written in as 1 act, 3 scenes. Einstein is 1 act, straight through, no intermission. And then I write until I'm out of steam. And then I go back and reread it once and make changes in it once, and then I move forward. And as I'm writing, then I start making some notes on a notebook next to my computer. I only allow myself to go through what I've written the previous day once. Sometimes I'll go twice. But usually I try to keep it down to once or twice, because you'll get stuck in the muck and mire of rewriting the first 10 pages and never moving forward, because they're almost never going to be perfect. It's very, very important to me that I have a lingual sense of who the character is before I begin them, what their vernacular is. I knew what's her name? Rita. I knew how Rita spoke. I knew how Ben spoke. I knew how Curtis spoke, and I knew how Lisa spoke. And I knew who they were. I could see them in my mind, how they stood, how they dressed. It says in the opening stage direction, I think it says, she's wearing a faux Chanel suit in the opening stage direction of the Lyons. That wasn't put in after production or after a first draft. That was put in, if that's the first sentence, that was the first sentence I typed ever of that play. I saw her in that hospital room in a faux Chanel suit that she bought at Loman's, or the equivalent thereof, TJ Maxx, or we hear it's TK Maxx. And then I get to the end of the first draft. I take a day off. This is generally the process. Then I go back to the beginning and I do a draft, and the first draft might be pretty short. I do a draft where I just let them talk as much as they want to. And by then they're people. I just let them talk and talk and talk. And then it gets long. And then I go back and do a third pass where I cut and cut down to what seems, if a beat seems to be going on too long. Very much of the play to me is about the music of the play. If a beat is too long, if I'm waiting for, in Einstein Letter, there's this big monologue from a character that we don't meet till halfway through the play, because I was tired of hearing the same voices. Because almost all the scenes are 2 people, and so I had to shake it up. It's very much about, who do I want to hear from next? What sound do I want to hear next? And if I have a sense of who they are, I know what they want, and I know what the play's about, so I can hear from them next. What they have to say will be evident. So that's really the process. And then I generally don't do a lot of rewriting in rehearsal. I do a lot of cutting in rehearsal. I do rewriting if it's necessary or called for, but I mostly do cutting. I try to go in with too much and try to cut, largely because I do not trust myself, A, to ever have a good idea for a sentence again in my lifetime, but B, I don't necessarily trust myself to be able to put myself in the same exact frame of mind I was in when I wrote that scene. So I can get close, but I'm not the person I was when this started. So in a way, it's impossible to really rewrite and be who you were. I certainly couldn't rewrite Fat Men in Skirt. I have it on silent. I'm not that person remotely. It's 35 years ago. I would have a hard time making rewrites for Pterodactyls. Even Maiden's Prayer. It would be easier to do a rewrite for Lyons. The closer you get, the easier it is. But I try to go in with too much material so that I don't have to rewrite. I just have to cut. You can reshape so much by cutting.
What makes you cut?
I'm bored.
Okay.
Mostly. It's seldom the actor can't make it work. It has been on occasion, and this I won't name because it's just cruel. But I was working on a play and the actor had too much. It's happened twice that I know of, that I can remember. And I could make it work. And I mean, like, I could read it with the director, the two of us, and we knew what it was. but they just couldn't get there, and it seemed phony or flat. And so you just start cutting it to the bare bones to keep what you needed to keep the story accurate or to get the response from the other actor. That's the I'm bored and the actor can't make it work are the two biggest things that make you cut. Because if something doesn't make sense and you're cutting it for that reason, well, somebody should have pointed that out to you a few readings ago or in the, you should know that before you're in rehearsal. 3 Changes, by the way, I never heard the play before they asked to do a production at Playwright Horizons. So let that be a lesson to you.
Are there obstacles that when you started or that you still run into when you write?
In the writing of a play or in the getting a production? Because there's getting a production, getting production has always felt like a Sisyphean task to me. I have felt like every day of my so-called career has been a struggle that I've scratched and clawed my way to the middle. Very, very hard to have to create a place in the theater. I always felt like the theater as an entity and as a community was surrounded by an impenetrable brick wall that I've managed to wriggle into the wall, not quite into the center, past the wall. I think most people feel that way, however. I'm aware that most people feel that way. And from the outside, most people looking at me, we go, what are you talking about? You've been on Broadway, you've had all these productions. The Lyons, I had to fight tooth and nail to get a production of The Lyons. Nobody wanted to do it. The Vineyard, I had another play the Vineyard was interested in doing that hasn't been done, that I don't think ever will be done. I don't think I like it. I don't know. I don't think I like it, really. There's things I like in it, but they had wanted to do another play. I had to do 3. I had readings at a whole bunch of theaters. I hadn't done a play in years. I had to do 3 readings of The Lyons for the Vineyard before they said yes, and only because I said, can we do a reading for the subscribers, just as in chairs for free? They said yes, and the subscribers liked it so much they thought, okay, I guess we should do it. We should do the production. So that's the biggest obstacle, and it only gets harder the older I get. And I do realize right now, rightly, is a time when voices that have not been heard are being heard. It's a small pie, so voices that have been heard are somewhat crowded out, and this is as it should be. Doesn't mean that it is necessarily pleasant to be crowded out, but it is as it should be. The obstacle to writing is simply having a play inside of me. I don't have an obstacle once I'm writing. I never have had writer's block once I've started a play, ever. I let it sit there long enough that it's going to happen. Food Chain was written in 3 sittings, period. I wrote the first scene in a sitting, took a day off, wrote the second scene in a sitting, took a day off, wrote the third scene in a sitting, and virtually never changed a word. Raised in Captivity was written over 5 weeks. Only ever cut 1 speech, didn't change anything, even in rehearsal. Now, some plays you make a lot of cuts and minor changes in rehearsal, but I've never workshopped or a play. I've never worked with a dramaturg. I don't know what their job is. I really don't. Sometimes I write historical, like this is what Pterodactyls is about, mainline society. This is what mainline society was, and this is who it is, fine. But I've taken notes. I did a rewrite from the lab to the production of Pterodactyls, 1 rewrite. That was it. And it was a note from Doug Abel. And it was a brilliant note. I did a rewrite. I made a big change in The Lyons because of a note from Bob Falls when he read it. And then it was there in the Vineyard. Then I took it out when we moved to Broadway. It wasn't really a very good note. I love Bob. Love him. And he might not have given that note if he was working on the play instead of just reading it once, And again, this makes me sound like I'm not opposed to making those changes. I just don't know that I'm capable of it, and they haven't come up. I also think that my process is such that that plays come out of me in a very finished form. And I don't, a bad one, like I think Three Changes is a pretty bad play, but it was finished and it is what it is. I don't think there's a better version of it. I don't think rewrites would have helped it. It is the entity that it is. When we were working on This Day Forward, which was not a successful production for lots of reasons, but I don't judge when I'm in the process. This may surprise you. I have no judgment at all of the product when I'm in the process. And I have judgment of that line. I have judgment of that move. I have judgment of that scene. But of the product, it is the thing it is. It is the perfect version of the thing it is. There might be a better production down the road that I like more, but at the moment, this is the perfect version of what it is. In this time, in this space, it is what it is meant to be. I don't really know why I have that feeling when I do, or where it comes from. And it seems philosophical. And it's not something I thought about. It is just what is natural to me. Director, Mark Brokaw, tearing his hair out because This Day Forward wasn't going as we wanted it to go. And I'm constantly trying to give him help and help actors or help anybody I can to get it to be where we want it to go. But ultimately, it is what it is. And you can only make it, so you can only change it so much.
Do you think that's a gift or do you think it's a curse?
Gift.
Okay.
I do. I think it's a gift because otherwise, you go mad. I mean, you know, when we did this reading, there were physical elements. I wanted music stands, and the producer of the reading, producers for reading, didn't want music stands. Well, I fought tooth and nail. I was going to have those music stands. I didn't want the audience seeing the white backs of scripts when they weren't in scenes. To the point where I had a backup plan for music stands where we could get them that morning if he showed up and they weren't there, because we only had the one day and then we were in the space one day. But they were there. So it's not like I don't fight for what I want. But at a certain point, it just is what it is. I don't know. But I absolutely think it's a gift. And I think Mark, and I think, well, I don't really talk to Wilson Milam or Milam Wilson. I never knew which was his first name or which was his last name. But Mark, who worked on a production that was not optimal, would say it was a gift. Tim Sanford would say it was a gift. Because Tim Sanford came up to me after Three Changes and he said, and it was a bomb. And he said, mind you, the New York Times particularly has never been anything less than respectful of me. And the press has always pretty much respected me, with the exception of Howard Kissel, who was an asshole. And I put it on Facebook recently. Someone mentioned him, and he was just an asshole. And he didn't hate everything I wrote. He hated most things that I wrote. But his attack of people personally is what made him an asshole. And I feel no qualms about saying that. And I didn't know. Now I have communicated. Now that he's left the Times, I have communicated with Ben Brentley. I never communicated with him. I didn't know him. I don't know. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't understand this current vogue for responding to criticism, even if you think that criticism is racist, sexist, misogynist, homophobic, anti-Semitic. I don't. To me, it lacks dignity to respond to it. That's how I was. That's my background. I don't necessarily. I guess I do judge people who respond. I don't judge the people. I judge their responding. You know, some wonderful people I know have lately been responding to critics, and I still think they're wonderful people. I just don't like that practice. But Tim Sanford came up to me after this play that was not good, and said to me, asked me if I felt dejected by it or depleted by it, and I said no, because the act of making something is always more joyous than the act of not making something, of making nothing. So I didn't feel depleted by it. And I think he was surprised that I felt that way, because I could certainly be crabby sometimes, you know, having to watch it. But because I'm not Francis of Assisi. But in general, that is where I come from. Making something, even when it doesn't work out, is better.
What do you think holds most playwrights back that are trying to succeed?
I don't know that there's a single thing that holds most playwrights back. I think, well, first, I was once on a panel many years ago with a bunch of other, I guess, gay playwrights. They were there, and it was about gay playwrights. So, which I never thought of myself as a gay playwright. I thought of myself as a playwright. But one of the people was Marie Irene Fornes. She thought I worked there. She kept saying, "Would you get me a Coke?" Like I was saying, I don't work here. But someone stood up at the end. It was organized by the Village Voice and moderated by a man I think named Don Shuey. And someone stood up with a question. There's so many of us, meaning young gay men in the audience and a sprinkle of women, with voices that need to be heard and stories that need to be told. What can we do to generate more venues? And no one wanted to answer. And I said, all right, I'll answer it. Well, I've sat in the literary offices and looked at the submissions. And frankly, most of your stories are dull and your voices are shrill. If you can't get a play produced as a gay man in the theater in 1980, when we have controlled the theater for the last 50 years, it might be the play. Think about it, might be the play. I don't know what holds playwrights back, because I think it is a tiny, tiny pie that people are fighting for over a sliver of. So I have no idea what holds them back. I mean, for me, I saw no option and didn't give up. Tenacity is the only reason I managed to earn a living eventually. But most people would have given up by 32, which is when Pterodactyls opened. They would have said, okay, I guess I don't have what the public wants. And interest, I don't know if this holds them back, but I do think it is a big mistake to worry about at all what will be liked and what will be popular and what is the current temperature of the theater. I waited. Kitchen sink dramas, I guess, and comedies were sort of in vogue when Pterodactyls opened. Well, that certainly is not that. I have never written the kind of theater which I guess was, when I started, was more in vogue, but I wasn't getting produced. Worrying about what's in style won't help you. I just don't think it'll help you. Never helped me. So just write the kind of play. All you can do is write a play that you really want to see, that you really enjoy seeing. And also, I do think that there is, this will sound terrible and old crotchety, but I think that there is a sense of entitlement now that I didn't have and that I don't think people had in my generation. Why can't I get a workshop? Why can't I get a grant? Never had a workshop, never had a grant. Even the idea there are so many voices that need to be heard. Fight till your voice is heard. I never had a sense that I was entitled or I should have a place in the theater. Never. Had to fight. I knew that it was a very, 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 very rarefied place to get. So I see it on Twitter so much and on Facebook, sort of complaining by 20-year-olds that they don't have careers. Who the fuck has a career when they're 20?
Right. Sorry, that kind of threw me off right there. Because
I use
do you think that label? Do you think those labels hinder?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I really do. I admire that statement. You said, I never thought of myself as a gay playwright. I just thought of myself as a playwright.
I was once asked about, there was a gay theater called the Lyons, and when I was starting out, if I should, an agent asked me, should I submit a play to the Lyons? I said, no, I'm a playwright. I don't write gay plays. And I've written a couple plays, very few, but a couple that have no gay character in them. But because my world has gay people and straight people in it. I think what's really interesting is Food Chain was a very quietly subversive play in that it had gay characters and bisexual characters, and no mention is made of it. His mother comes on stage and just yells at him for being fat. no tumult is made over their sexuality, which at that time was a surprising turn of events. It's not shocking because it's not the point, and because it's a farce, but it's subversive in that way. I do think those labels are purely a hindrance. They're, absolutely. And I think we've moved past it. I mean, there's still festivals. There's festivals for female playwrights and gay playwrights and Black people of color, maybe specifically Black playwrights. But I don't think whole theaters are devoted to them so much anymore, and I think that's a good thing. It's nobody's business. I mean, the color of a playwright's skin, I guess, is obvious if you put your picture out there, but it's nobody's business what your sexuality is, or your religion is, or your gender is. And I don't mean that it's nobody's business. I've never been, from the first interview I ever gave, talking about it. But it should have no impact on the play's merits or demerits, as it were. Nor should it be of interest to someone reading the play reading your work for the first time. It's just a play.
On that note of none of your business, which this is none of mine, but since it came up in the conversation, if I can delve into something personally.
I was 17 years old, and it was on a couch in Studio 54, and I never saw him again. I was fixed up by a friend of mine who went to Sarah Lawrence. I found her someone. She found me someone. That was it. I was off to the races.
Close to the question that I was going to ask.
Uh-huh.
At what point after the conversion therapy didn't take, did your parents accept?
Oh, well, I knew when I was 7 at the end of conversion therapy, it wasn't what we think of as conversion therapy. No, I played with puppets. It was quite passive. But I knew that I had fooled them into thinking when I grow up, I want to marry someone like mommy and not someone like daddy. So I knew it was a failure at that point. I didn't know the language for it, but I was leading a double life from 7 to 16 when I said I'm moving to New York to go to NYU. I went into therapy here, and I remember a therapist saying to me, I said I should really come out to my parents. And my parents were ready for me to come out. My mother would say, is there anything you want to talk about? I wasn't ready. But a therapist said to me, when you're a child, you have to share everything with your parents. As an adult, you decide what to share with them. It wasn't, I wrote a letter. I guess I was not quite 18, maybe 17 or 8, just 18, around them, and told them I was gay. And they said, we knew it. And they were, at that point on, quite supportive. They weren't anti-gay when I was 4, so much as that's what they, in 1964, a shrink told them, your son is going to be gay, but we can cure it. That was the era, and they did what they were told. I asked my mother many times, did you feel guilty about it? And we did what they told us. So that was her response. And then she had another drink. So they were supportive. I give my father particularly enormous credit because he made a much longer journey than my mother in terms of support. I think a man in that era, it was, for any man, it was a longer journey to support a gay son. And I never told them when I had boyfriends in college, although my mother met one. And she knew that we were like special friends. But it was an era, by the way, the 70s and 80s, until there was AIDS, when people weren't so interested in having boyfriends. You sort of had sex with a lot of people anyway. And then AIDS came, and then you had sex with no one. So I didn't share any romantic details of that part of my life with them. But they knew that I was gay and were relatively supportive.
One final question, and it's a total shift from that. Do you have any advice for playwrights of any levels, or beginning or intermediate or anything?
Yes. I'm trying to decide if I should share this because it's what I used to say to students at the end of the semester at NYU. And it's a humiliating thing to share for me. So I'm trying to decide if I have the courage. It just makes me sound so egomaniacal.
Well, on that note, before you do say that, I do want to come to your defense, because I will say that from the introductions that I've read in your plays, there's nothing but humility.
I think but as a person, as a writer, I think I'm an okay writer. I mean, I don't think I'm the greatest, but I'm okay. I've written some things I hope will last 2 or 3 tops, maybe 1. If 1 lasts, that's a great achievement. And whether or not it lasts is immaterial, because yes, I'll be dead. So what the hell do I care? Very, very lucky that I'm lucky. I mean, luck is such a big thing. When the Vineyard, now you have to be prepared for your luck, but the Vineyard did Pterodactyls, and in those days there was a Sunday critic and a daily critic, and they both came to the same performance. That was luck, and so they were competitive, I think, a little bit with each other. So they both gave the play importance, like they wanted to be the person who made it important. Ben Brantley wrote a great review. He had some complaints. They were the polar opposite of the complaints of David Richards, who wrote the Sunday Review. Polar opposite. He put a big picture in Ben Brantley. Well, David Richards, the top half of the Arts and Leisure was Hope Davis going like this in Pterodactyls. It didn't matter whether it was a good review or not. It made us very important. When Austin Pendleton had opened to play at Playwright's Horizons that week, we were the top. Luck. Pure, unadulterated luck. So luck was very important. But what I will say, I mean, I think I'm about as happy as most people. Maybe not, but maybe most people are happier. But I try to take responsibility for my happiness and try to make, like, I moved to London because I thought it'd make me happy. But
did it work?
So far. I will say it was lovely living out COVID in Covent Garden. I mean, if I have to be in lockdown and all I can do is go for a walk, there's no lovelier place than Covent Garden to go for a walk in. But I no longer think forever. Forever is a meaningless concept. Maybe forever, maybe till I'm dead, maybe not. Who knows? I say to students, this is my advice. It does not apply to me. That way I'll get out of it. But I think I'm relatively humble as a playwright. I'm humble as a playwright. I'm confident as a maker of theater, meaning I know I'm not insecure about what to put on the stage. I'm not insecure. There's lots of things I'm not. I'm mostly insecure, but there's a couple of things I'm very secure about. Anyway, like I know, I don't think I'm particularly smart. I certainly don't think I'm attractive. I know I can't add a column of figures. I know I'm funny. I was never nervous to be pushed out there when the set fell apart. I did the welcome speech to a British audience, and the producer said to me, "I hope they get you to the reading." And that made me a little nervous, but after the first laugh, I wasn't nervous. I know I'm funny. And this is a credit to my parents, of whom I may have painted a stark and black picture. They were both very, very funny. My sister is very funny. And they were funny in completely different ways, as is reflected in my work. This is not going to answer your question. My father was droll and sophisticated and witty and wrote poems that would make Ogden Nash jealous. And my mother was vulgar and funny and shocking. I feel like my work is a amalgamation of those two things. The advice I would give them is, I would say to them, if you leave here with nothing, because you can't teach playwriting, and I didn't try. I basically gave them some tricks, like how to write an act or a scene in a genre to shake things up, and keep the story going. Pterodactyls, the first act of Pterodactyls is sort of non-linear and experimental, and then the second act first act is Philip Barry. The second act is Kaufman and Hart in the third act is Pinter. And I don't hide it. I put it out there. She's eating cold cereal at the beginning of the first act, just like in the third act, like in the birthday party. It helped me tell the story. It fit and it helped me tell the story. But if you leave here with nothing, leave with this. The knowledge that you are fascinating. And I don't say belief, because you believe in God means he might exist, he might not exist, but you believe. You have to know that you are fascinating. Because if you're going to ask the world to be interested in what you have to say, you had better know that what you have to say is fascinating. And if you don't, you have no business asking other people to listen to it. So that would be my advice. Get that courage that what you have to say is fascinating. And if you don't think it's fascinating, don't say it. Wait until you have something to say that's fascinating.
Nicky Silver, thank you for coming on the Playwright Spotlight.
And never talk as much as me.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I appreciate it. Thanks so much. And we'll have to do this again, live stream it, so we can get some Q&A in there.